Hello everybody, welcome back to the Wrestling Guardians podcast. This is episode 4 of our podcast series. As ever, hope everybody is doing well out there. How are you doing in here? How has your week been so far?
Doing well, Dan. It's been a bit of a hectic week with work and everything, but hope everybody's keeping safe, and I hope everybody's been socially distancing as well.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, definitely echo that as well. So I've done something this week that I haven't done in quite a long time. I managed to sit through the majority of an episode of Monday Night Raw, so maybe that's a decent enough place to start. I've got to say, like, as somebody who maybe kind of hasn't watched an episode for quite a while, kind of coming back into it, there's definitely a certain feel of kind of like an underwhelming feel for me almost. Like I appreciate there's a pandemic on and everything like that, but it just, WWE at the minute just seems very kind of minor league, and dare I say it, they're kind of at risk of being upstaged in a way by AEW, with at least with the presentation and everything. So yeah, that's kind of where I want to kind of start from today. I mean, did you watch Raw yourself in here?
Yeah, Dan. I couldn't sit through the entire thing like you did, but I did watch a good bit of the show. And that's something that I felt for a long time too. I mean, the production value and everything just doesn't feel like what you'd expect from a typical WWE production. And I think that sort of reflects in the ratings, because if you look at Raw, I mean, the show isn't great, but they're trying to do more angles, and they're trying to do and they're trying to make things happen on the show, but it just isn't coming off for whatever reason.
Yeah, I guess that would be fair. You know, it's not for want of trying, but it's just they just seem to be kind of full of ideas, but not any of them with any kind of future to them. And I think, you know, knowing Vince McMahon's track record of recent, you know, he seems to be someone who kind of has ideas but is not willing to maybe see them through fully for whatever reason. I think a good example of that, and we didn't really speak about this much last week, but the whole Retribution angle. So still in its early days, but I guess like as a older sort of jaded wrestling fan, you kind of already look at it as something that might just fizzle out before it actually goes anywhere. What are you making of Retribution so far?
I'm just having a hard time taking them seriously at all, because they haven't really done anything of consequence. Okay, it's fantastic you beat up the NXT people who were at ringside cheering. Okay, you chase the announcers out of the building. But this week on Raw, they flip a car over and then ran away like a bunch of kids? I still haven't seen anything from them that tells me why I should take it seriously. I'd like to know, I'd like to know why I should care about them. I'd like to know who these people are. And if you're going to create some intrigue about who they are, maybe that could be compelling as well. But as things go, it's started very coldly.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up as well, because I noticed the hilarious contrast between one week where they're literally chainsawing the ring and beating up people, backstage or whatever, and then the next week they're throwing a brick through a window. It's like, whoa, what's maybe they're not as angry this week as they were last week. You know?
Yeah.
very, very strange. But yeah, I get, and I agree. I think we're still sort of waiting to kind of like know why we should care about this, or kind of what's all behind this. I mean, they're called Retribution, but we don't really know what they're trying to get retribution for. I mean, a few people have speculated that maybe this is, some kind of faction made up of people that have been fired in the past or something like that. But I don't see them doing that, because a lot of those names have already like signed contracts with other companies. So, yeah, I really don't know what this is supposed to be. I mean, do you have any ideas as to maybe who the ringleader will turn out to be eventually?
I haven't even devoted any of my mental energy to this topic, to be honest with you, Dan. I mean, it hasn't exactly been interesting television, but I'm really sorry. I'm failing to come up with anybody who could possibly the leader of this utterly boring and bland faction.
But I think the problem is they're already struggling to piece together enough stars to actually present on TV, let alone be the ringleader of some faction that they're trying to introduce. So it's going to be very difficult for them. I guess you can kind of see that they're at least maybe trying to appeal to things that are happening in the outside world. This is a very kind of volatile, kind of rebellious time in many ways, and maybe Vince is trying to kind of latch onto the back of that a little bit. But again, protests tend to have sort of goals and things they're trying to achieve, or at least things they're trying to rebel against. This just seems to be, like you say, like a bunch of children that are angry about anything and nothing, and just intent on vandalizing property and not much else. So yeah, it's not a great start, really.
As we know, Vince McMahon isn't exactly the most perceptive human being in the world, and he's not exactly in touch with current affairs. Maybe this is his idea of the maybe this is his perception of what the Black Lives Matter protests are going across the states are.
Perhaps, yeah. And we know he's so close to an election, and we know his best friend is one of his best friends is running for a second term. So maybe it would kind of suit his political agenda and his wife's political agenda to kind of portray this, as the Black Lives Matter protest. It's just an insight into the troubling mind of Vince McMahon.
Yep. Makes us feel better for putting more money in this guy's pocket.
Well, absolutely, yeah. That's a whole other issue entirely. Thank God we've got reasonable alternatives like All Elite Gymnastics to fall back on. Oh dear. But yeah, I mean, Raw itself, I mean, the thing it kind of started with was this sort of story angle, this ongoing thing with Seth Rollins and Dominic Mysterio. I mean, one thing I just couldn't get away from is just how annoying Seth Rollins is. He basically, in my opinion anyway, has become a heel off the back of the fact that he couldn't make it as a babyface. You kind of, you see him as like the kind of the less or maybe the least noticeable member of the Shield, and you think, oh, this guy's pretty good in the ring, maybe they could do something with him. As soon as he gets into that main spotlight where you have to kind of pay attention to him and his character, you realise there's not really anything there. I think it's even more annoying for me because I think he's been portrayed as one of the sort of greatest performers of his generation, and this generation, Shawn Michaels or whatever. But I just think there's not a lot to him, and I think he's mildly better as a heel. But either way, I just find him very annoying, and I don't really want to hear him speak too much now.
Is some of this just down to the cadence with which he delivers his promos?
Yeah, and the insistence on using the other guy's name so many times in his promos just really, really grates me.
I mean, he's basically tried to do some version of the straight edge society, which CM Punk was so successful with a few, like almost a decade ago now, and it hasn't. And it isn't really clicking for me. Then I mean, Jesus Christ. His entire thing can't be bullying the son of a luchador legend. It's just very underwhelming, this entire Seth Rollins heel run to me. Underwhelming seems to be a word we're using a lot on today's podcast.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's just a bit of a running theme at the moment, I guess. Hopefully, we'll talk about more positive things as the show goes on, but
I kind of get it. I mean, he's not. I mean, he hasn't exactly been dealt a great hand. The scripting of his promos is terrible. He is overexposed on television and everything, but the guy doesn't really come across as someone who is all that charismatic. Don't get me wrong. I think he's a very good in-ring performer. And when he's wrestling in the main event of a pay-per-view in a title match or something, I think there are times when he can come across as a top star. But if you can't carry segments on television, then I'm not sure if you really should be in that prominent of a position to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you summed it up then as well. You can't deny his in-ring talent is very, very impressive. But then, maybe that is the reason why he's this generation superstar, because he can wrestle, but when he gets on the mic, he's very underwhelming and very annoying. And is kind of a little bit... he has this kind of unwarranted sort of arrogance about him as well. Not just from a kayfabe character point of view, but kind of in real life as well. He just seems to be someone who genuinely thinks that he's leading this generation into a new golden era of wrestling or something. And I think that's more of a reason why I dislike him. At least with some wrestlers that are bad on TV, you can at least say, well, they seem like reasonable enough guys in real life. But Seth kind of, seems so far up his own arse that, it's just difficult to know where he sort of begins and ends.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's one way of looking at it. The man doesn't do himself any favors on social media. See, Dan, I don't really have a problem with him looking at things the way he does, because, if I were a professional wrestler, I'd want to believe in what I'm doing, I suppose. I mean, although you could argue that you should have perspective as well. But
Yeah. Well, I mean, just now we've touched on it, I guess. I mean, there's a couple of sort of quotes or sort of things he said in a recent interview that I think are worth kind of looking at here. I believe you wanted to maybe look at something he said about sort of the current audience, and maybe the reason why this current generation of wrestling doesn't have kind of long-term storytelling is because the audience's attention spans are maybe not as long-term enough. Is that something you agree with, would you say?
Yeah, I think he's right, and he does allude to the fact that you can binge watch television these days, and that's sort of the culture now. But but WWE never has tried to tell a story for much longer than 2 weeks. I mean, they usually jump ship at the first sign of turbulence. So, I mean, you kind of also have to look at your own creative process and everything. In many ways, I think Seth Rollins is emblematic of WWE and where they are right now. Their product has a lot of issues, and they're just not willing to admit that they have issues.
Yeah. Well, you don't need to go that far back in history to, go back to the last time when a long-term storytelling angle really paid off, and we've mentioned it a few times on this podcast before. The Daniel Bryan versus Authority angle, which basically in this in this day and age is definitely considered a long-term story, even though it was basically from a SummerSlam to a WrestleMania. But the payoff to that, the intrigue going into WrestleMania 30, the amount of people maybe kind of coming back into the product, if only temporarily, that just kind of scream out the fact that long-term storytelling is the way to go, even if it might not seem that way in the immediate. But is this again us just being too optimistic and too kind of long in the tooth, and just sort of wanting to relive the old days? Or?
Yeah, quite possibly, Dan. But let's say that you are not willing to craft stories over a longer period of time. Is it too much to ask for stories to just be coherent?
Yeah. Well, I suppose wrestling in a kind of storytelling perspective always has to have a certain level of inconsistency, because if this was actual real life, then the amount of times that you feud with somebody, you would always kind of remember that. And so how the fact that two people can feud for a long time, and then just because the other person turns face in the future, they suddenly best friends and they can work together. So you've got to have that slight kind of mismatch going on. But yeah, if you're talking about a storyline in itself, I mean, just some consistency would be really appreciated. And we just don't seem to get that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you have an owner who himself has ADHD and seemingly rewrites scripts, every at the 11th hour every week, I'm not sure you should be talking about your audience's attention spans. Perhaps you have to look at that guy's attention span first.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point as well, because I think a related and sort of really frustrating aspect of today's wrestling is the fact that like ideas do seem to be kind of popping up here and there, but they're not kind of seen all the way through, or Vince just decides he's suddenly cold on that and doesn't want to kind of go with that anymore. Which again, this may well happen to the Retribution thing. Like it may just be in a couple of weeks we never hear from them again. I mean, I think they tried to do that kind of hacker storyline on SmackDown that didn't go anywhere as well. So yeah, there's definitely short-term attention spans on both sides here.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I mean, you kind of have to, even if we want to argue that the audiences doesn't have the attention span anymore, perhaps you could condition them to sort of expect long-term storytelling from WWE, and that's not something they seem to be willing to do either.
Yeah. I mean, it's we can either kind of just go on like this indefinitely and just see the viewer figures just decline until wrestling is no more, or something's got to give somewhere. Either if it's fans kind of being more vocal about kind of demanding better kind of long-term in-depth storytelling, or just some kind of change in the sort of the creative process of WWE. I mean, the big thing that I think a lot of younger fans talk about now is what will happen after Vince McMahon kind of fully passes on control of the company to somebody else, and whether that's going to make any difference. But then, I don't know, even on NXT, there does seem to be some consistency there, and Triple H is obviously kind of attuned to like better generations of wrestling where there was this sort of like longer term in-depth stuff going on. But there's nothing really that's kind of grabbed my attention with NXT other than maybe one or two feuds. The Gargano Ciampa thing kind of had some kind of a consistency, I suppose, to it. So maybe that's a good sign going forward. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe when Triple H gets the opportunity to work with a better roster somewhere down the line, and guys with big names and things like that, he'll be able to consistently put out a better product. But that's speculation for now. And Triple H just hasn't had the challenge of producing 5 hours of weekly television, which is no picnic.
Yeah. It all remains to be seen, I guess. And but at the minute, this is just where we are, I think. And Rollins is very much the superstar that we currently deserve, if that makes sense.
I mean, in some ways, as we were talking about, he has come to embody WWE's incompetence.
Incompetence and just sort of frustration, I guess. Certainly that I have anyway. But I think I think you mentioned a couple of episodes ago how obviously there's a very obvious problem going on where there's some stars that aren't available to them, like Becky Lynch, Roman Reigns, Brock Lesnar. But again, what does that say about today's products, where we're sort of waiting with anticipation for Roman Reigns and Becky Lynch to come back? Like no disrespect to either of them, but are they really that good in the grand scheme of things? Well,
neither of them is a second coming of Stone Cold Steve Austin, let's put it that way.
No. Another thing, just talking about the Attitude Era, I guess, another sort of quote that Seth made, I think in the same interview, was he was asked about the eye for an eye match with Mysterio, and it basically made the point that if this were to have happened in the middle of the Attitude Era back in '99, it would have been like better received, I guess. Thoughts on that?
I don't think he's wrong. I think that certainly would have. I think that's something. If you'd done that in the Attitude Era, we would have looked back on it now and just dismissed it as a product of its time. How quirky was the Attitude Era? Something like that. What I can say was that piece of garbage does not deserve should not have been on my television screen in 2020.
Yeah, I think it's the difference between like this might have happened back in '99 as a kind of like middle of Raw, just like sort of side comedy angle, before we got onto the actual kind of compelling main event stuff. Whereas today, this is basically taken as like one of the serious feuds that we should like legitimately care about. I think it's the lack of self-awareness going on. Like these performers seem to be presenting these kind of stipulations as like a integral part of today's product, when really it's just it's side comedy crap that we probably would have got in the Attitude Era, but wouldn't have been so sort of prominent as it is today.
Yeah, I agree with you. It certainly didn't have any place as a main event angle.
Absolutely not, no. And looking forward to SummerSlam, I think I don't want to bash the guy too much because he's only just kind of started his career in earnest, but looking at Dominic Mysterio as a contender for Seth Rollins, it just doesn't really fill me with much, to be honest. And I don't really know how much he's going to sort of prove anybody wrong when it comes to SummerSlam itself. But I'd rather just see Seth and Rey Mysterio go at it again, because at least I guarantee a fairly good match. I don't know how good Dominic's going to come across, really.
I believe he has been in training for quite a while, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him put on a good match. My only concern would be if it's plausible for him to beat Seth Rollins clean. And I'm not sure that it is. I think it's likelier that we either get like a sort of back and forth affair where Seth Rollins ekes out a scrappy win, or Dominic wins with the external interference.
Well, I think they've made it into a like some form of a no disqualification or something. I think from the segment on Raw, it seems like Seth was saying, you can bring your like kendo stick and anything you want. So I don't know if that's the indication that we're going to get no DQ or something, which would, I guess, make it more likely for Dominic to win in those circumstances. But but it's not really going to do much, really. I think at this stage I'd rather see a kind of a valiant effort, but ultimately coming up short against Rollins. I think that would endear him to more people, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think no matter what happens, he has to beat the crap out of Seth Rollins. Like, he has to leave Seth Rollins bruised and battered and everything, and the whole works. He has to leave Seth Rollins in a pool of his own blood.
Yeah. Which, I sort of kind of expect him to happen, but it remains to be seen. Very, very exciting times, obviously.
But I will give them credit for Drew McIntyre versus Randy Orton. I think the build-up to that match has been pretty good. Drew McIntyre has held his own as a main event babyface, and Seth Rollins I beg your pardon, and Randy Orton is doing the best work in the company. He's an outstanding heel, and his promo and subsequent attack of Ric Flair was just outstanding.
Yep. I agree with all of that, to be honest. I think, Drew, he has, in many ways, has been very, very fortunate to have kind of been given the reins of the company in during these times. I hope I hope that he does get to kind of keep his place as not maybe necessarily the champion, but in that kind of main event kind of scene of WWE. Really interested to see him feuding with some guys going forward. As for the Ric Flair thing, it's a relatively sort of eye-catching way to close out the show, and definitely get some legit heel heat on Randy, which is always good. But again, it's just funny, isn't it? The one episode of Raw that I come back to, and closing out the show is two guys that I was sort of more used to seeing during the Ruthless Aggression era. But here we are in 2020.
And you have half of Evolution closing out Raw.
Yes, Evolution versus 3.
Let's get it twisted. Let's not get it twisted. The Ruthless Aggression era wasn't exactly good television either.
It wasn't, but I would take it now if they offered it me again.
No, come on, Dan. Surely, we don't want to see 3 years of Evolution running roughshod on Raw.
Well,
I mean, I know people look back on Evolution now, oh, they have the cool theme song, and Batista and Randy Orton went on to become big stars. Okay, but I also had to sit through 3 hours of watching Triple H cut promos, and it was not fun.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I think the only reason why we're not getting that now is because of what's going on with COVID, to be honest. I'm sure that Triple H will be back making 20-minute promos when everything's back to normal again.
Oh no.
Just this time as the COO.
Oh no. Well, I mean, to be fair, I actually think he's a better promo now than he was back in the day. Back in the day, he was just grating and awful. And I remember he just couldn't get his look right. I mean, he had the Harley race stash and everything going on, and he used to wear open collar shirts as if he was the second coming of Ric Flair. But in his prime, Ric Flair was a handsome guy. Triple H, well, Triple H is not.
Can I just ask you one more thing before we move on from WWE? What the hell are they doing with Natalya at the minute? Like, why is she dressed like Lana? Why is she acting like Lana? I don't understand. Like, this is one of the better female competitors you've had over the last sort of 10-20 years. Like, well, I don't understand what's going on.
Dan, I'd be lying to you if I told you I had any idea what is going on with this angle.
I mean, Natalya has had some awful gimmicks over the years, but this one seems to be just like, you know, there's no going back for her now. It's just they just don't know what to do with her anymore, which is a shame because I've always had great respect for Natalya. But
do you think it's time for her to jump on the trampoline and head over to AEW?
Yeah, sure, why not? Yeah. I don't know. Maybe she could give them some much needed legitimacy to their female division, which is very lacking. I can't believe in all these episodes of bashing.
I believe Kenny Omega plays a big role in the female division. Apparently, like, he oversees, some of the goings on in the female division. Maybe while she's there, Natalya can teach Kenny Omega how to wrestle.
Wouldn't that be something? And if Natalya ever considered a career as a ballet dancer, performance artist, maybe Kenny could teach her some things as well. It only took us the best part of half an hour to get back to Kenny Omega and his performance art.
Dan, I believe you were watching a little bit of Jim Cornette this week. What did you think of his takes on Kenny Omega?
Yeah, I think, like I said last week, he's nicknamed him Kenny Olivier. So I think it's really appropriate. It is actually, quite refreshing to hear somebody who isn't just on the Omega bandwagon to that extent. Like you said, I think some people actually see him as the second coming of Jesus Christ. All for what was, in fairness, a fairly decent run in New Japan Pro Wrestling, but now he's been given his own sort of freedom to do what he wants. It's like, no, we don't want that anymore.
Yeah.
Or at least I don't.
I also think that Kenny Omega thinks he's the second coming of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem. But I think, so again, I think this is the problem with the majority of so-called stars of this generation. I think they really, really do believe in themselves, and I know that's what you're kind of supposed to do as a wrestler, but at least when you can kind of recognise that as a fan, at least you can kind of forgive it a little bit. But yeah, when it's so unfounded like it is in Omega and Rollins, it's difficult to kind of see past that, I think.
I think a lot of fans sort of see that as their sort of their version of Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair, Seth Rollins versus Kenny Omega.
Well,
Pro Wrestling Twitter would be jizzing all over that one.
I mean, you can't blame people for, I guess, kind of wanting a piece of that kind of actually, because it must be frustrating as a younger wrestling fan to kind of hear so many people say, well, back in the day you had, Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair and Harley Race, if you're going even further back, and it must be really frustrating to look at what you have and think we don't really have any version of that, so let's just kind of live in this kind of delusional state and just believe that Omega versus Rollins is some kind of a rerun of Flair versus Hogan. Do you question here? If that ever were to happen, would you see that happening in a WWE ring or in an AEW ring?
Oof, that's a good question. I mean, I'd probably have to say in a WWE ring, because I think, for whatever reason, they regard Seth Rollins very highly, and they're going to keep giving him massive contracts again and again, and eventually, maybe the people at AEW will see the light and let go of Kenny Omega.
Mm. Well, I mean, if history does repeat itself and Triple H gets his hands on AEW in a few years, I would love to see what he decides to do with Omega and the Young Bucks.
Yeah.
Or maybe just put them in that cage with those dancing girls. Like, maybe that would be a more suitable place for the Young Bucks.
Yeah, absolutely. You job them to the Street Profits. I think they have more charisma than the Young Bucks.
So the Street Profits is something I noticed on Raw last week. So I think one of them was supposed to be poisoned or something last week.
Yeah.
And we kind of had a bit of a fallout from that on this week's show. But then I noticed that the other Street Profit guy, who wasn't poisoned, just came out like dancing and clapping and shouting catchphrases again. It's like your buddy's just been poisoned. What the hell are you doing?
Was it Montez Ford who had been poisoned?
I have no idea. I don't care. But it was one of them.
Yeah. So because Bianca Belair sort of his wife sort of took it upon herself to avenge her husband and went after Zelina Vega with intensity. Apparently, Zelina Vega plays video games. I had no idea. Apparently, she streams on Twitch, and they did an angle where Bianca Belair sort of assaulted Vega while she was streaming.
Okay. I must have missed that.
Now, as the old men of wrestling YouTube, you'll forgive us for not being up to date with Twitch, but
I thought you were mispronouncing Twitter, to be honest. I don't.
No. Twitch is this platform where people stream video games or themselves playing video games, and then other people give them money to keep playing video games.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, moving swiftly on. Hopefully we find something relatively positive to talk about today. But should we dare to talk about AEW?
Oh, yes. Our favourite promotion.
Well, it was Tag Team Appreciation Week this week, which I thought was interesting, given the sort of the way they treat tag team wrestling on AEW. Can we talk about that rather kind of nauseating segment with I think the Young Bucks were in the ring with 3 real tag teams, Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard, and then Rock and Roll Express and FTR. I think it quickly became apparent to me that this wasn't Tag Team Appreciation Week. This was Young Bucks Appreciation Week, presented and written by the Young Bucks.
Yeah, it's just their egos running wild.
Absolutely. I just felt so sorry for the Rock and Roll Express to have to stand there and say, "Oh yeah, we've really paved the way for you guys, and you guys are, this generation's Rock and Roll Express." It's like, oh god.
I did think Tully Blanchard's promo was pretty decent, though.
It was actually, yeah. Made sense. It kind of gave some kind of credibility, I guess, back to the segment. What did you think of FDR's heel turn?
Dan, I'm not gonna lie to you. I completely missed it. I didn't watch the entirety of the AEW, as shocking as it may seem.
Basically, I assume it's a heel turn anyway. They attacked the Rock and Roll Express when the Young Bucks were busy dealing with something, and I thought, according to Cody Rhodes, I thought faces and heels weren't relevant anymore in today's wrestling, but obviously he didn't get the memo.
See, that's the thing that I don't think. I'm not sure that there's any one person who has any sort of oversight over what's going on throughout the show. I think they have different people who script different segments, and when the different segments clash, I am well. I mean, they're not really bothered, are they?
Not particularly. But yeah, but one thing that, and again, we this has become a bit of a regular thing for this show. But like one thing that kind of at least saved AEW to some extent was the MJF segment. Again, a very very impressive promo from the guy. Having sort of Moxley finally kind of enter into this feud, I guess, from an on-screen point of view. I was just watching Moxley kind of attacking MJF, thinking like this is a feud now. Like this is something I can kind of sink my teeth into.
I really like the way that he calls Moxley Jonathan. There's something about it that just cracks me up. MJF got a really good promo. But Dan, did you think it was a little bit too easy for Moxley to sort of outsmart MJF's goods? Like they were just waiting for him to make his usual entrance, and the guy just walks in on the ramp.
Yeah, that was the one thing that maybe kind of let the segment down as a whole for me. I kind of get it because they had to find a way of Moxley getting to MJF, but despite the fact that the ring was full of people that were on MJF's side. But yeah, it felt a bit too kind of maybe sort of a bit too slapdash for me.
Yeah, but I thought Moxley was pretty good on the mic as well. He cut a nice promo and. It showed me some fire. Like you said, I think this feud is now alive and well.
Yeah, and I think this could work for Moxley because I think again I think he's another one of these guys that I think people will maybe give slightly too much credit to. He's certainly not bad on the mic, but he's like pretty. He epitomizes that kind of that plateau, I guess, that people reach these days, where like because they can string a sentence together, they're considered good mic workers. And I guess, but I think that sort of contrast between the way he presents himself and MJF's promos, I think, could really work here, and really sort of some really compelling build up, I think, to All Out, which I'm definitely looking forward to now.
I think I'm not as I think I'm much more sympathetic towards Moxley than you are. I kind of like his cadence and his delivery, which is something that lets our beloved Seth Rollins down badly. I just think that Moxley's verbiage isn't always perfect. I mean, when the promos are scripted out for him, it's terrible. And when he's left to his own devices, he doesn't really do a great job of it either. I think he's better left to, operating in short bursts.
And I think when he mixes in a little bit of comedy into his promos, I think it works quite well. Like his feud with Jericho leading up to their title match, I think was really good because there was definitely a serious element to it, but there was also that really good segment I thought where we thought that he could possibly be joining the Inner Circle, and then just kind of turns around and goes, no, I'm not going to join the Inner Circle. I think that really worked really well. And again, with somebody like MJF, he could potentially kind of utilize more of the kind of the comedy. I'm not saying go full comedy, don't do it too much, but it could show that other side to Moxley's promos that I know he has. Because at the bit like that kind of high intensity stuff that he does, it's like it's pretty good for what it is, but like you'd struggle to kind of distinguish between multiple Moxley promos, if that makes sense. They all kind of seem like the same thing, whereas I think he is actually quite versatile in the fact that he can kind of do both sort of serious and comedy.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dan. He is certainly versatile in that respect. Do we think that this feud would be a little bit better if the roles were reversed, in the sense that it would work a lot better if Moxley were chasing MJF, the champion?
I think so. I guess it's just a matter of circumstance. But yeah, I think this is another reason why I think it would be really good for AEW to have MJF as the champion, because that dynamic will work much better. These kind of young, kind of hungry baby faces going after this sort of long-term heel champion. I think that's just the way they need to go with this. But yeah, I agree it would be good if it was the other way around, but I guess this is just what we've got. But yeah, AEW standards, this is good TV at least,
Yeah.
or it could be, yeah.
Who are Omega and Hangman Page working it all out?
I couldn't really tell you. They had a match this week against Jungle Express or Jurassic Express or whatever they're called.
Was that the one? That's the team. Yeah, the team with the dinosaur and Jungle Boy.
Yeah. I don't know whether anything's kind of been announced longer term or who there's expected to face it All Out, but yeah, that was what it was this week. I mean, to be honest, I think the main feud going on is between Omega and Page. I think they're doing this sort of like slow build type thing where eventually they're going to be split up and go their separate ways.
Right.
Which would be good for Hangman Page to kind of get him.
Absolutely. I would love to see a street fight where he just beat the ever-living crap out of Kenny Omega with a kendo stick.
Yeah. That'd be brilliant, yeah.
So Dan, was there anything else you wanted to touch on?
Well, I mean, given the fact that it was Tag Team Appreciation Week on AEW, I just wanted to, maybe it's kind of your thoughts on, because throughout the show they were interviewing tag teams and asking them who their favourite teams of all time were, in a very rather kind of nauseating fashion. I think the only teams that were mentioned were the Hardys, and I think Omega actually said that his favourite tag team of all time were the Young Bucks.
Oh, of course he did. That explains so much.
Yeah, I don't know how my laptop screen kind of survived a shoe being thrown at it at that point. But just, I thought if we could end on a more kind of positive note. Do you have a favourite tag team of all time, Manu?
I'm not sure you're going to like my answer, but my favourite tag team of all time is Edge and Christian. Like, when I was younger, I thought they were absolutely hilarious. And I love the dynamic the two have, even on the WWE Network, on their show, ENC's Show of Awesomeness, or whatever it's called. I think those two have a really good dynamic going together, and they're really funny. And now that they're older, I like that they also do cater to the more hardcore wrestling fan, and I just think they're legitimately funny. That's the reason I have a soft spot for them.
Yeah, but I don't dislike that answer really. I get it. There was, thinking about names from the past, that's certainly one that I would at least consider. But no, I mean, for me, would it be too easy for me to say the British Bulldogs? Very, very
no, not really. I mean, they are one of the great tag teams of the last 30-40 years.
But it's difficult because I'm not old enough to have actually lived through their sort of heyday, so a lot of the stuff I've seen is from old footage and that. But I just love their presentation. I just love the fact that they used to come down to the ring with Matilda. I think Dynamite Kid is one of the he gets talked about a lot with older fans, but kind of generally he's very underrated, or I think not enough people kind of appreciate just what of a talent he was. And then obviously
I think he did. Itself. If I'm not mistaken, I think he did some of his best work in New Japan. No.
Yeah, there were a series of matches he had with Tiger Mask from New Japan, and I think a lot of, especially the way sort of tag team wrestling is going, I think a lot of the current generation of fans would really appreciate it if they kind of went back and watched it, because some of his work was fantastic. I'm trying to think of a team, sort of. I mean, I guess wouldn't be too much of a surprise for me to say the New Age Outlaws, because again that they in many ways just embodied what the Attitude Era was all about. So if you think Attitude Era, you kind of think, other than The Rock and Stone Cold, you kind of think of New Age Outlaws as well. And the Dark Order as well, obviously.
I mean, the undisputed greatest tag team of all time is Young Bucks. Well, I mean, how could we not talk about that?
Oh dear. Right. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we finish?
No, I think that's about it from me.
Cool. So yeah, another episode from the Grumpy Old Man of YouTube.
We'll find something positive to talk about next week. We promise.
Yeah, I know. Well, once again, everyone, thanks very much for listening. As we say every week, I hope everybody is staying safe out there, maintaining social distancing, and just following. So, we'll see you all next time.
Take care, guys. See you.